Margaret Hale held the check up high, waved it like a dirty rag in front of 40 people and screamed, "This is fake! Get this man out of my bank!" Then before anyone could stop her, she ripped $10 million into pieces and let them fall onto the marble floor like confetti. Ethan Cole didn't move. He didn't shout. He just looked down at the scraps of paper, 2 years of his life, his little girl's entire future scattered at his boots. But what Margaret didn't know was that the quiet security guard by the door had already made a phone call. And in 11 minutes, her own boss would walk through those doors and call this worthless man in the worn-out jacket. "Sir, yeah, before we go on, drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far Ethan's story travels tonight. And if you believe a man's worth was never in his clothes, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the very end. You won't believe what happens the next morning." The bell above the door of Rivergate National Bank gave a soft chime as Ethan Cole stepped inside, and for a moment nobody looked up. That was fine with him. He'd spent most of his life being the kind of man nobody looked up for. He held his daughter's small hand a little tighter. Sophie, 8 years old, in a pink coat that was one size too small because he hadn't had the money to replace it yet. That was going to change today. Today, everything was going to change. "Daddy, is this the bank where the money goes?" Sophie whispered. "That's right, sweetheart," Ethan said, kneeling down to her level. His knees popped. 41 years old, and his body sounded like an old porch step. "This is the bank. We're gonna put our money here so it's safe, and then you and me, we're gonna go get some pancakes. The kind with the whipped cream. The big pancakes. The biggest they got." And Sophie grinned, and Ethan felt something warm crack open in his chest. 2 years. 2 years of nights so long he'd forgotten what sleep tasted like. 2 years of ramen noodles and cutting his own hair over the bathroom sink, and telling this little girl, "Not right now, baby," every single time she pointed at something in a store window. 2 years of building something in the dark while the world moved on without him. And now folded in the inside pocket of his jacket, the same brown jacket he'd worn to Sophie's mother's funeral 3 years ago, the same jacket with the frayed cuff he kept meaning to fix, was a cashier's check for $10 million. He stood back up and got in line. And the bank was busy that morning. Businessmen in pressed suits. A woman in heels tapping her manicured nails against a leather folder. A young couple whispering about a mortgage. Ethan looked down at his boots. The leather cracked white across the toes, the sole starting to peel on the left one, and for just a second, the old feeling crept up on him. The feeling that said, "You don't belong in a room like this." He pushed it down. He'd earned his place. He didn't need to look like the men around him to be worth more than all of them combined. He just needed a teller, a signature, and 30 seconds. That's all he needed. "Next," a young teller called. Ethan walked up with Sophie in tow. The teller was maybe 25, a kid with a nervous smile and a name tag that read Derek. "Morning," Ethan said, and slid the check across the counter face down. "I'd like to deposit this into a new account, please. I don't have an account here yet, but I was told I could open one." Derek picked up the check, turned it over, and Ethan watched the young man's face do the thing he'd seen 100 times before. The little flinch, the double take, the eyes darting up to look at Ethan's jacket, his boots, his tired, unshaven face, then back down to the number printed on the check. "This is... Derek swallowed. "This is $10 million, sir." "Yes, it is." I mean a new account." "That's right." Ethan kept his voice easy, patient. He'd expected this. "It's a cashier's check from Meridian Trust. There's an escrow account backing it. You can call and verify it. They'll confirm the funds are real and available. I've got my ID right here, and the paperwork from the escrow company, too." He reached into his jacket and laid an envelope on the counter thick with documents. "Everything you need is in there." Derek looked at the envelope. Then he looked at the check again. Then he did the thing that would set the next 30 minutes on fire. He looked over his shoulder and said, Let me get my manager." Ethan nodded slowly. "Sure, that's fine." "就是." But it wasn't fine, and some part of him already knew it. Because the way the kid said manager, the way his voice climbed a half step, and his eyes flicked back to that frayed cuff, Ethan had heard that tone his whole life. It was the sound of a door quietly closing. "Daddy!" Sophie tugged his sleeve. "Are we getting pancakes soon?" "Soon, baby. Just gotta talk to one more person." Margaret Hale came out of the glass office in the corner like weather rolling in. She was a tall woman, mid-50s, silver bob cut sharp as a blade, a blazer that probably cost more than Ethan had spent on groceries in a month. She walked with the certainty of a woman who had spent 28 years being right, and who had decided long ago that being right and being fair were the same thing. Derek murmured something to her low and passed her the check. Ethan watched her read it, watched her eyes lift, and he watched her decide. That was the thing people never understood. She decided about him before she said a single word. The decision was already sitting in the corner of her mouth when she walked over in the set of her jaw, in the way she held the check a little away from her body, like it might be sticky. "Sir." She said the word like it tasted wrong. "I'm Margaret Hale, the branch manager. Can you tell me where you got this check?" "I earned it," Ethan said simply. "It's a payment. There's a full paper trail in that envelope your teller has, ma'am. An escrow account, a contract, my identification. If you'd just call Meridian Trust." "Where do you work, sir?" Ethan paused. "I'm self-employed. I built a cybersecurity system. A company bought the licensing rights to it. That's what the 10 million is." Margaret's eyebrow lifted a fraction of an inch. It was a small movement, but Ethan felt it land like a slap. "You built a cybersecurity system?" "That's right." "You." She glanced at his jacket, at his boots, at Sophie in her too small coat, and she let the silence do the insulting for her. "By yourself." "By myself, 2 years." Ethan kept his voice level, but his hand found Sophie's shoulder and rested there. "Ma'am, I understand it might seem unusual. I know how I look, but everything checks out. All I'm asking is that you make one phone call and verify it. That's all. One phone call." Behind him, he could feel the line shifting. The woman with the leather folder had stopped tapping her nails. The businessmen had gone quiet. People were listening now. People were watching. Margaret Hale noticed the audience too, and something in her seemed to straighten, to grow like a woman stepping onto a stage. "Sir, I've been in banking for 28 years, she said louder, now pitched for the room. 28 years. And in that time I have developed something that no phone call can replace: instinct. And my instinct is telling me that something about this is not right." "Your instinct." Ethan repeated the word carefully. "A man walks in off the street." She gestured at him, a flick of the wrist that took in all of him at once, the jacket, the boots, the frayed cuff, dressed like this with a child, and hands me a $10 million check and a story about building software alone in his basement. "You'll forgive me if I don't take that at face value." "I didn't ask you to take it at face value," Ethan said. And now, for the first time, there was iron under the calm. "I asked you to verify it. Those are opposite things, ma'am. One requires trust, the other requires a telephone." Somewhere behind him, someone let out a low breath, almost a laugh, quickly swallowed. Margaret's face tightened. She didn't like being corrected. She especially didn't like being corrected in front of a lobby full of people by a man in cracked boots. "Derek," she said without breaking eye contact with Ethan. "Did you look at the security features on this check?" I didn't get that far. Ms. Hale, because to me," Margaret went on, turning the check over in the light, tilting it, performing her expertise. "The watermark looks off. The print quality is not what I'd expect from a legitimate cashier's check. And the amount," she gave a thin little laugh, "well, the amount speaks for itself. The amount is real," Ethan said. "The check is real. Call the number in the envelope." "I don't need to call anyone." "That's exactly the problem, ma'am. You do." The two of them stood there, the check between them, the whole lobby holding its breath. And in the corner by the door, a broad-shouldered man in a gray security uniform, Thomas Brennan, a retired sheriff's deputy who'd taken this job to fill his days after his wife passed, slowly folded his arms and started to frown. Thomas had spent 30 years reading people, reading rooms, and everything about this one was wrong. He'd watched 100 con men try to pass 100 bad checks, and they didn't look like this man. Con men were slick. Con men were nervous. Con men didn't calmly ask you to call and verify that was the last thing a man running a scam wanted. And con men sure as hell didn't bring their 8-year-old daughters along. But it wasn't Thomas's call. Not yet. Ma'am? Ethan tried again, and Sophie pressed closer against his leg, sensing the temperature in the room. I've got my daughter here. I've been up since 4 this morning. I have driven 40 minutes. And all I am asking, the only thing I am asking, is for you to pick up a telephone and dial the number on this envelope. If Meridian Trust says the check is bad, I'll walk out that door and never bother you again. You have my word. But if it's good, and it is good, then you'll process my deposit, and we'll both go on with our day. Where's the harm in a phone call? For half a second, just half a second, Ethan thought he saw it get through, thought he saw Margaret's certainty wobble. Then a man in the line, one of the businessmen, muttered just loud enough, "Come on, lady, just call the number." And that was the wrong thing to say, because now Margaret Hale's pride was on the line in front of everyone. Now backing down didn't mean being fair, it meant being wrong publicly, and Margaret Hale did not do wrong. "I don't take instructions from the line," she snapped, wheeling toward the man, then back to Ethan. Her voice had gone hard and high. "And I don't take instructions from you either, sir. This is my branch. I decide what happens under this roof, and I am telling you that I will not be pressured into processing a fraudulent instrument by a man who cannot even—" "Don't." Ethan's voice cut across hers, low and sudden and cold. Not loud, but it stopped her dead. The lobby went dead silent. "Don't," Ethan said again, quieter now, and he pulled Sophie a little behind him out of the line of fire. "You can insult me all you want, ma'am. I've been insulted by better than you and worse than you, and I'm still standing. But you're gonna do it with my little girl right here listening, and I'm asking you, one father, to whoever you are, to just make the phone call and stop this." For a long moment, nobody breathed. Margaret Hale looked at him. She looked at the check in her hand. She looked at the 40 people watching her, waiting to see what the branch manager was made of. And Ethan watched her make the second decision. The big one. The one she'd regret for the rest of her life. He watched her decide that being right mattered more than being kind. That her 28 years of instinct mattered more than one phone call. That her pride standing here on this stage she'd built mattered more than the truth. "You want to know what I think of your check?" she said. "Ma'am." "I think," Margaret Hale said, and she lifted the check high enough for the whole lobby to see that it isn't worth the paper it's printed on. "Please don't. This check," she announced to the room, her voice ringing off the marble, "is fake." And Ethan Cole watched, helpless, frozen, one hand still on his daughter's shoulder, as Margaret Hale took 2 years of his life between her manicured fingers and tore it in half. The sound of it was so small, just a soft, dry rip, but it went through the lobby like a gunshot. Somebody gasped. The businessman who'd spoken up said, "Oh my God," under his breath. And Sophie, little Sophie in her too small pink coat, looked up at her father's face and asked in a tiny voice, "Daddy, why did the lady rip our pancakes money?" Margaret tore it again, and again. 4 pieces. 6. She let them go, and the scraps of a $10 million check fluttered down and scattered across the polished floor of Rivergate National Bank like dead leaves. Ethan didn't move. That was the thing the whole lobby would remember later when they told this story to their families over dinner. That the man didn't yell, didn't lunge, didn't curse. He just stood there, this quiet man in the worn brown jacket, and looked down at the pieces of paper on the floor with an expression that wasn't anger. It was grief. Because that check could be replaced. Ethan knew that some cold, logical part of his brain knew the escrow company would just issue another one. But that wasn't what she'd torn up. What she'd torn up was the moment. The pancakes. The one clean, shining morning he'd promised his daughter after 2 years in the dark. The morning where just this once, the world was supposed to treat them right. She'd ripped that up and you couldn't reissue that. There, Margaret said, breathing hard, a strange triumph flushing her cheeks. Now, I'd like you to leave my bank. Thomas. She snapped her fingers toward the security guard. Escort this man out. And that's when Thomas Brennan finally moved. But he didn't move toward Ethan. He walked slow and deliberate over to the wall, to the phone, and he picked it up. Thomas. Margaret's voice climbed. I said escort him out. Did you hear me? I heard you, Margaret, Thomas said, calm as still water, and he started to dial. I'm just going to make a call first. A call to who? As Thomas didn't answer her, he put the phone to his ear, and he watched the pieces of the check on the floor, and he waited for the line to connect. Because 30 years of reading people had told Thomas Brennan one thing for certain, in the last 10 minutes, the wrong person was about to get thrown out of this bank, and it wasn't the man in the brown jacket. Ethan knelt down. Right there in the middle of the lobby in front of everyone, he got down on one knee, and he gathered up the pieces of the check one by one, and folded them gently into his palm. Not because he needed them, but because a man doesn't leave 2 years of his life scattered on the floor for strangers to step on. Sophie knelt down next to him and helped picking up a corner scrap with her small fingers, and she handed it to him and said, Here, Daddy, we can tape it. And Ethan Cole, who had not cried when his wife died, who had not cried through 2 years of 16-hour days, who had not cried when the world called him worthless, one more time felt his throat close up so tight he couldn't speak. Yeah, baby. He finally managed, and his voice cracked right down the middle. Yeah, maybe we can tape it. He stood up. He looked Margaret Hale dead in the eye, and he did not raise his voice, and what he said next was so quiet that the people in the back had to lean in to hear it, but they all heard it, and none of them ever forgot it. You had one phone call to make, Ethan said. One. And you'd rather tear a man down in front of his kid than pick up a telephone. I hope, ma'am, that whatever you were protecting today, your pride, your instinct, your 28 years, I hope it was worth it. He turned to go, took Sophie's hand. And behind him, Thomas Brennan spoke into the phone. Yes, hello, this is Thomas Brennan, security at the Rivergate branch. I need to speak with the regional director. It's urgent. A pause. No, it can't wait. Tell Ms. Mercer she needs to come down here right now, and she needs to see the lobby footage from the last 15 minutes. Another pause, and Thomas's eyes flicked to Margaret, then to the man walking toward the door. Because I think we just made the worst mistake this branch has ever made. And it's still on camera. Ethan stopped one hand on the door. He didn't turn around. But he didn't walk out either. He just stood there holding the pieces of his ruined check in one hand, and his daughter's small warm fingers in the other. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Cole did the one thing he had almost forgotten how to do. He waited. Ethan stood at the door with his hand on the cold brass, and for 11 seconds he counted them later, because that was the kind of thing his mind did under pressure. Nobody in the lobby said a word. Then Margaret Hale found her voice. Thomas, hang up that phone this instant, she said. You do not have the authority to call the regional director. That is a chain of command violation, and I will write you up for it. Then write me up, Thomas said, and he didn't hang up. He held the receiver against his shoulder and looked at her the way a man looks at a storm he's seen coming from a long way off. But Ms. Mercer's already in her car, Margaret. She's 12 minutes out, and when she gets here, she's going to want to know why there's a $10 million check in pieces on the floor of your lobby. The word 12 minutes landed on Margaret like a weight. Ethan watched her face, watched the flush of triumph drain out of it, and something colder move in behind her eyes. Not doubt, not yet, but the first cousin of doubt, calculation. Fine, she said, lifting her chin. Let her come. I have nothing to hide. I stopped a fraud today, and when she reviews the facts, she'll thank me for it. The facts, Ethan repeated. He turned around slowly, still holding the pieces of the check folded in his palm. You want to talk about facts now, ma'am, now that somebody with a bigger title is on the way. I don't answer to you. No, Ethan said, but you're about to answer to her. He walked back toward the counter, didn't rush, didn't storm, and he set the folded scraps of the check down on the marble, and next to it, he laid the thick envelope Derek had never opened. It's all still right here. Everything you refused to look at. My ID, the escrow contract, the direct line to Meridian Trust. You had it in your hand the whole time and you never once looked inside. He tapped the envelope. 12 minutes. That's how long until your boss walks through that door. You've got 12 minutes to make the phone call. You should have made 12 minutes ago. Might want to have an answer ready for when she asks why you didn't. Something flickered across Margaret's face fast, and she covered it by turning to the lobby. Everyone please go back to your business. There's nothing to see here. This is a routine security matter. But nobody moved. That was the thing. Not one single person in that line went back to their business. The woman with the leather folder had lowered it to her side. The young couple who'd come in about a mortgage were standing shoulder to shoulder watching. And the businessman who'd told her to just call the number. He crossed his arms now and said, loud enough for the room, "It's not routine though, is it? You tore up his check. I watched you do it. We all did. Sir, this does not concern you." "It concerns me plenty," the man said. "I've got money in this bank. And if this is how you treat a man over a check, I'm sitting here wondering how you'd treat me on a bad day." He shook his head. "I want to talk to that director too when she gets here." A murmur went through the line agreement, low and dangerous, like the sound of a crowd realizing all at once that it's on the same side. Margaret Hale heard it. And for the first time since she'd walked out of that glass office, Ethan saw her understand that the room had turned, that the audience she'd been performing her authority for had become a jury. "Derek," she said sharply, spinning toward the young teller, and there was a new edge in her voice now, a scramble under the surface. "Derek, tell them. You saw the check. You said yourself the amount was suspicious. Tell them what you saw." Every head in the lobby turned to Derek. The kid went white. He looked at Margaret. He looked at Ethan. He looked at Sophie standing there in her too small pink coat, holding her father's hand. And Ethan watched a young man arrive at the single most important crossroads of his short career, right there behind the teller counter, with 40 people waiting to hear which way he'd go. Derek's voice came out thin. He swallowed. "I never said it was suspicious, Ms. Hale." "You said—" "I said it was a lot." Derek's voice cracked, then steadied, and something firmed up in him as he spoke like a boy, finding out in real time what kind of man he was going to be. "I said it was $10 million, and I'd never processed anything that big, and I wanted to get my manager. That's all I said. I never said it was fake. I never said it was suspicious. I called you over because I thought you'd know what to do." He looked down at the counter. "I didn't think you were gonna do that." The silence that followed was worse for Margaret than any shout could have been. "You ungrateful little—" she started. "He's telling the truth," Ethan said quietly. "And you know he is. That's why it stings." Margaret's mouth snapped shut. 9 minutes now by Ethan's count. He glanced down at Sophie, who was watching all of this with the wide, solemn eyes of a child who knows the grown-ups are doing something serious but can't quite name it. He crouched down to her again. Hey, baby, look at me." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You okay?" "Is the lady in trouble?" Sophie whispered. "I don't know yet, sweetheart." "She was mean to you." "She was," Ethan said. He wasn't going to lie to her. He'd never lied to her, not once, not even the small, comfortable lies most parents tell. "She was mean. But you know what we don't do when somebody's mean to us? We don't be mean back." Sophie recited the way you recite a thing you've been taught 100 times. "That's right. We don't be mean back. We stand up straight and we tell the truth and we let the truth do the work." He kissed the top of her head. "We're almost done here, and then I promise you pancakes." "With the whipped cream?" "A mountain of it." Miss Sophie almost smiled, and that almost smile did something to the whole lobby. Ethan could feel. It could feel the room softening toward the two of them and hardening toward the woman by the counter, and he understood in that moment that he'd already won something. Not the money. The money had never really been in danger. But the thing, the dignity. The room had decided who the honest man was, and it wasn't the one in the expensive blazer. And Margaret felt it too. And a cornered animal is at its most dangerous right before the end. "You think you're clever," she said low, stepping toward Ethan as he rose back to his feet. "Bringing a child in here, making a scene, playing the poor honest father. I've seen it before. I've seen every con there is. You people always have an angle." The words "you people" dropped into the lobby like a stone into still water. Words "you people." And Thomas Brennan, still holding the phone, finally set it down in its cradle and walked over. He was a big man, and he moved slow, and when he spoke it was without heat, which somehow made it land harder. "Margaret," he said, "you need to stop talking now, for your own sake. Every word you say, that camera's catching it." He nodded up at the black dome in the ceiling. "And Catherine Mercer is going to watch all of it. Every word. So if I were you, I'd sit down in my office and I'd wait, and I'd think real hard about what I want the last thing on that tape to be." For a moment, Ethan thought she might actually take the advice. She didn't. "I am the branch manager of this location," Margaret said, drawing herself up. "And I will not be lectured by a rent-a-cop who couldn't cut it as a real police officer." 30 years a sheriff's deputy," Thomas said mildly, "retired with commendation. But you go on ahead. And I will not be told how to run my branch by any of you." That check was fraudulent. I made a judgment call. And when Catherine gets here, she is going to back me up, because that is what leadership does. It supports its managers. She was breathing hard now, her composure fraying at every edge. "Do you have any idea how many bad checks come through these doors? How many scams? I am the last line of defense in this branch, and I will not apologize for—" The bell over the door chimed. Every head in the lobby turned at once. A woman stood in the doorway. 50s maybe. Dark tailored coat, silver hair pulled back, a leather bag over one shoulder, and a phone in her hand, that she was already lowering her eyes, already moving across the room, across the frozen tellers. The murmuring line, the pieces of paper scattered white across the dark marble floor. The man in the worn brown jacket. The little girl in the pink coat. And finally, last of all, Margaret Hale, standing in the center of it with her mouth still half open on a sentence she never got to finish. "Nobody," Catherine Mercer said in a voice that was quiet and even and absolutely cold. "Move, and nobody touch anything on that floor." Margaret's face broke into relief so fast it was almost pitiful. "Catherine, thank God. Let me explain what's been happening here. This man came in with a—" "Margaret." Catherine didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "I'd like you to be quiet for a moment." She crossed the lobby. She didn't walk fast, but she walked like the floor belonged to her, and she stopped in front of Ethan, and she looked at him, really looked the way Margaret never had. She looked at his face first. Not his jacket, not his boots. His face. "Sir," she said, "my name is Catherine Mercer. I'm the regional director for this bank, and before I say anything else, I want you to know I am very sorry for whatever has happened here this morning. Are you all right?" Ethan felt something in his chest go tight. It had been so long since anyone in a place like this had spoken to him, like he was a person that the simple courtesy of it nearly undid him more than all of Margaret's cruelty had. "I'm all right," he said, his voice rougher than he wanted it. "My daughter's a little shook up." Catherine's eyes went to Sophie, and something in the hard professional line of her face softened by a degree. "Hi there," she said gently. "That's a real pretty coat." "It's too small," Sophie said matter of fact. "But Daddy said we're getting a new one after the pancakes." Catherine Mercer went very still, and Ethan watched her put it together. The man, the child, the too small coat, the pancakes. The $10 million torn up on the floor watched the whole shape of the morning assemble itself behind her eyes, and watched her face change in a way that made him almost feel sorry for Margaret Hale. Almost. "Margaret," Catherine said without turning around. "My office is in the regional building 40 minutes from here. I don't drive 40 minutes on a Tuesday morning for routine security matters. I drove here because a member of your own staff called me and said, and I'm quoting him now." She looked at Thomas, who gave a small nod. "We just made the worst mistake this branch has ever made, and it's still on camera." She let that sit. "So, before I watch the footage, and I will watch the footage, I want to hear it from you. In your own words. What happened here?" "I stopped a fraud," Margaret said immediately. "This man presented a check I believe to be fraudulent. I exercised my professional judgment. Did you verify the check?" "I didn't need to verify it. 28 years of experience." "Margaret." Catherine's voice cut clean through. "It's a yes or no question. Did you or did you not call the issuing institution to verify the check before you destroyed it?" The lobby held its breath. "No," Margaret said. "But, did the customer ask you to verify it?" A longer pause. "Yes." "How many times?" Margaret's jaw worked. "I don't recall the exact—" "4 times," said the businessman from the line. "I counted. 4 times he asked her to call the number, and 4 times she said no. And then she tore it up and called him a fraud, and told the guard to throw him out." "And she said you people," the woman with the leather folder added quietly. "I heard it. Everyone heard it." Catherine Mercer closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one. Like a woman absorbing a blow she'd been bracing for, but had still hoped wouldn't land. Then she opened them, and she turned to Thomas Brennan. "The footage. Your office right now. Margaret, you're coming too." She looked at Ethan. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to wait just a few minutes more. I know that's a lot to ask after what you've been through, and I promise you it's the last thing I'll ask. There's a chair right over there, and I'll have someone bring your daughter something to drink. Is that all right?" "That's fine," Ethan said. "Can I have a juice?" Sophie asked hopefully. "You can have 2, Catherine said, and the ghost of a real smile touched her mouth before it vanished again into steel as she turned toward the office. "Thomas, now." They went in Catherine Thomas and a Margaret who was suddenly walking a great deal slower than she had all morning. The glass door swung shut behind them. And through the glass, the whole lobby could see them. Could see Thomas leaning over the monitor and pulling up the footage. Could see Catherine standing with her arms crossed, watching the screen. Could see Margaret standing off to the side with her hands clasped in front of her, growing smaller by the minute. Ethan sat down in the chair. Sophie climbed into his lap, even though she was really getting too big for it, and he let her, and he wrapped his arms around her and watched through the glass. He couldn't hear anything, but he didn't need to. He watched Catherine's face as the footage played, watched her go from grim to graver, watched Thomas point at something on the screen and Catherine lean in close, then straighten up slow. Watched Margaret start to talk. You could see her mouth moving fast, explaining, gesturing, and watched Catherine hold up a single hand without even looking at her, and watched Margaret's mouth stop. "Daddy," Sophie whispered against his chest. "What are they looking at?" "They're looking at the truth, baby," Ethan said quietly. "Just like we talked about. We stood up straight, and we told the truth, and now we're letting the truth do the work." Somebody brought Sophie a juice box. The young mortgage couple came over, and the woman crouched down and told Sophie she was being very brave, and Sophie held up her juice box proudly, and the businessman came over and shook Ethan's hand and said, "I don't know you, friend, but you handled that better than I ever could have. My name's Frank. Whatever happens in there, I want you to know the whole room's on your side." "Appreciate that, Frank," Ethan said, and meant it. Through the glass, the footage ended. Catherine Mercer stood with her back to the lobby for a long moment perfectly still. Then she turned around, and she looked out through the glass door straight across the lobby straight at Ethan Cole, sitting there with his daughter in his lap, and even from across the room, even through the glass, Ethan could see something in her face that made him set Sophie gently down off his lap and rise slowly to his feet. It was the look of a person who had just seen exactly how bad it was. The office door opened. Catherine came out first, Thomas behind her, and Margaret last of all, and Margaret Hale looked like a different woman than the one who'd swept out of that office 20 minutes ago. Smaller, grayer, her silver bob no longer sharp, but somehow deflated, her hands twisting together in front of her. Catherine walked to the center of the lobby. She stopped, and when she spoke to the whole room in a voice pitched to carry to every corner of it, because she understood the way Margaret had understood, but for the opposite reason, that some things have to be said in public to mean anything at all. "I've just watched 15 minutes of security footage," Catherine Mercer said. "And I want to say in front of all of you, in front of everyone who witnessed what happened here this morning, that what I saw was a complete and total failure of everything this bank is supposed to stand for." Nobody breathed. "A customer came into this branch," she went on, "with a legitimate financial instrument and every document required to verify it." He asked repeatedly, patiently, with his child standing beside him, for a single phone call. A phone call that would have taken 90 seconds and settled the entire matter. Her voice didn't rise, but it hardened with every word. That phone call was refused, not because of anything on the check, not because of anything in his documents, but because of the way he was dressed. Because of the jacket he was wearing, and the boots on his feet, and the assumptions somebody made the second he walked through that door. She turned. She looked directly at Margaret. "And then that customer's property, a $10 million cashier's check drawn on a verified escrow account, which I confirmed the authenticity of 90 seconds ago from your own office phone, Margaret was destroyed. In front of witnesses. In front of his 8-year-old daughter." The word verified went through the lobby like an electric current. Frank, the businessman, let out a low whistle. The woman with the leather folder put a hand over her mouth, and Margaret Hale closed her eyes. "It was real," someone in the line breathed. "The whole time. It was real the whole time." "It was real the whole time," Catherine confirmed, "and the only thing standing between this man and his money was a manager who decided her instincts were worth more than the facts, who decided that a phone call was beneath her, who looked at a hard-working father and his little girl and saw a criminal because he didn't look rich enough to be telling the truth." She let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. Then Catherine Mercer turned, and she crossed the lobby, and she stopped in front of Ethan Cole, and in front of the whole branch, the tellers, the customers, the security guard, the disgraced manager, and one small girl in a too small pink coat clutching a juice box. The regional director of Rivergate National Bank looked the man in the worn brown jacket in the eye, and she said the word that changed everything. "Sir." She said it clearly. She said it with weight. She said it like an apology and a promise and a correction of every single thing that had been done to him that morning, all folded into one small syllable. "Sir, on behalf of this bank and on behalf of myself personally, we owe you an apology. And I am going to spend the rest of this morning making sure it's a real one." Ethan Cole opened his mouth to answer, and found that for the first time all day he had nothing calm and steady prepared to say, because "sir" was the word he'd walked in hoping to be worth. "Sir" was the word Margaret had spat at him like it hurt to use. And now here it was given to him plain and honest, by the one person in the building with the authority to mean it, and it broke something loose in his chest that 2 years of grinding sacrifice had welded shut. He looked down at Sophie. Sophie looked up at him. "Daddy," she whispered. "The nice lady called you sir." "She did, baby?" Ethan managed, and his voice wasn't steady at all. Now wasn't steady one bit. "She sure did." Catherine Mercer turned back toward Margaret Hale, and her face went from warm to arctic in the space of a breath, and everyone in that lobby understood that the apology was over and the reckoning was about to begin. "Margaret," Catherine said, "we need to talk. Now, Catherine Mercer walked back toward the glass office, and she expected Margaret to follow her. But Margaret didn't move. "No," Margaret said. Catherine stopped, turned halfway. "Excuse me," I said no. And there it was again, that old iron creeping back into Margaret Hale's spine, that 28 years of never once being told she was wrong, rising up one final time like a drowning thing reaching for the surface. I'm not going to be marched into a back room and quietly fired like I'm the one who did something shameful. If you're going to do this, Catherine, you're going to do it right here, in front of everyone. Since apparently that's how we do things now. Bleh. The lobby went dead still. Ethan set his hand on Sophie's shoulder and eased her a half step behind him, an old instinct, the same one he'd had all morning. He didn't want this. He'd never wanted a spectacle. But he understood, watching Margaret plant her feet, that she wasn't doing this for the truth. She was doing it for her pride. She'd rather burn down in public than be led away quiet. "All right," Catherine said slowly, and she came back to the center of the floor. "You want to do it here, we'll do it here. But I want you to understand something first, Margaret. I came here this morning prepared to give you every benefit of the doubt. Every one. Thomas told me it was bad, and I got in my car thinking there's got to be another side to this. There's always another side." She shook her head. "I just watched 15 minutes of footage looking for your side, and it isn't there." He looked like a... Finish that sentence. Catherine's voice cracked like a whip. "I want to hear you finish it, Margaret." He looked like a... What? Margaret's mouth opened and closed, because there was no way to finish that sentence out loud in front of 40 people and a security camera that wouldn't end her career on the spot. And for the first time all morning, Margaret Hale understood the trap she'd built for herself, that every ugly thing she'd been thinking could be said with a raised eyebrow or a flick of the wrist. But the moment you had to say it in words out loud, in daylight, it curdled. "That's what I thought," Catherine said quietly. "I was protecting the bank." Margaret tried, and her voice had lost its footing now, sliding toward something almost pleading. "Do you know how many fraudulent instruments come through these doors? Do you have any idea the losses I've prevented over the years? I have stopped scams that would have cost this branch hundreds of thousands of dollars. I have a record." "You do have a record," Catherine said. "I pulled it in the car. You've flagged 14 transactions for fraud review in the past 3 years. There, you see, 11 of them cleared." Catherine let that number hang in the air. 11 of your 14 fraud flags turned out to be perfectly legitimate customers, Margaret. Legitimate people trying to access their own money who you decided didn't look right. I didn't see the pattern before because each one on its own looked like caution. But standing here now, looking at this, she gestured at the pieces of check still scattered on the marble. I see it plain as day. Ethan felt something cold move through him. Because that was the part that made it worse, wasn't it? He wasn't the first. He was just the one who happened to be holding $10 million when the pattern finally cost too much to ignore. There'd been others, people with far less than him, people who couldn't afford a torn-up check, people who'd been turned away and humiliated and had just quietly gone home because they didn't have a Thomas Brennan by the door willing to pick up a phone. Who were the 11? Ethan heard himself ask. Everyone turned to look at him. I'm sorry, Catherine said. The 11 people she flagged who turned out to be honest. Ethan's voice was quiet, but it carried. The ones before me. Do their names get read out loud in front of a lobby? Do they get a director driving 40 minutes to say sir to them? He looked at Margaret, and there was no hatred in his face, which somehow made it land harder. Or did they just go home thinking that's how it is for people like them? The question hung there, and it changed the whole temperature of the room. Because up until that moment, this had been about him, the wronged man, the torn check, the happy ending everyone could feel coming. But Ethan had just cracked the thing open wider, and now every person in that lobby was thinking about the 10 they'd never see. The ones who didn't get a rescue. Catherine Mercer looked at Ethan for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. Respect deepening into something closer to resolve. That, she said, is a better question than any I've asked this morning. And I don't have a good answer for it. But I'm going to. She turned back to Margaret. You're right about one thing. Fraud is real. Prevention matters. If you had made one phone call today and that check had come back bad, you'd have been a hero, and I'd have driven back to my office and never known your name. That's the tragedy of this, Margaret. You didn't fail because you cared about fraud. You failed because you decided you already knew the answer before you did the work. You substituted a feeling for a fact, and a feeling that only ever seems to point at the same kind of person. She looked down at the torn check. That's not instinct. That's something else. And I think you know what it's called. 9:40 in the morning. Ethan glanced at the clock on the wall behind the tellers. He'd walked in at 9:02. 38 minutes. It felt like it had been a year. So here's what's going to happen, Catherine said, and her voice found its full authority, now steady and final. Margaret Hale, your employment with this bank is terminated effective immediately. Not because you tried to stop a fraud, because you refused to verify a customer destroyed his property, discriminated against him in front of witnesses, and violated somewhere between 6 and 9 separate banking regulations in the span of 15 minutes. Thomas has the footage. Compliance will review all of it. And depending on what they find, this may not end with a termination. The customer would be well within his rights to pursue this a great deal further. Margaret's face had gone the color of old paper. You can't, after 28 years, you can't just... I can. And I am. Please collect your personal belongings. Thomas will accompany you and he'll see you out. Thomas will... Margaret let out a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. The security guard is going to escort me out, me. The way you ordered him to escort him out, Catherine said, nodding toward Ethan, 20 minutes ago. Yes. Except Thomas is going to do it with a courtesy you didn't extend to Mr. Cole. Isn't that right, Thomas? Yes, ma'am, Thomas said quietly. Margaret, whenever you're ready, take your time. And that the courtesy of it, the calm dignity Thomas offered her, that she had refused to offer anyone all morning. That was what finally broke Margaret Hale. Not the firing. The mercy. She stood there in the middle of the lobby she had ruled for so many years, and Ethan watched the fight go out of her, all at once, watched her shoulders drop, watched her become, in the space of a single breath, just a tired woman in an expensive blazer who had thrown away everything for the sake of being right about a stranger. I have a mortgage, she said to no one. I have a son in college. And here was the strange thing. Here was the thing Ethan Cole would think about for a long time after. He felt sorry for her. He didn't want to. God knew she hadn't earned it. But he'd spent 2 years one bad month away from losing everything, and he knew that particular fear, the mortgage, the kid, the ground disappearing under your feet, knew it in his bones, and he couldn't stand in that lobby and feel nothing while he watched it swallow another human being, even one who'd been so cruel to him. Ms. Mercer, Ethan said. Catherine turned. Yes, Mr. Cole. He hesitated. He could feel Sophie's hand in his warm and small. He thought about the 11 people before him. He thought about pancakes and whipped cream, and 2 years in the dark. He thought about what he wanted the last thing on that security tape to be his part of it, the part that was about who he was. I don't want to make this worse than it has to be, Ethan said. She's fired. I understand that, and I'm not asking you to change it. What she did, and there's got to be a line, but I'm asking you not to make it cruel on the way out the door. Because if you do... He looked around the lobby at the faces watching at his daughter. Then the only difference between what she did to me and what we do to her is which one of us is wearing the nice coat. And I'd rather the difference be something better than that. When the lobby was silent. Margaret Hale looked at Ethan Cole like she'd never seen him before, like she was seeing him, actually seeing him for the very first time, not the jacket, not the boots, but the man inside them, and what she saw seemed to hurt her worse than anything Catherine had said. Why, she said, and her voice was barely a whisper. Would you do that? After why would you say that for me? Because my daughter's watching, Ethan said simply. And because somebody should. And because I know what it feels like to have the floor go out from under you, ma'am. And I wouldn't wish it on you the way you wished it on me." He paused. "I'm not doing it because you deserve it. I'm doing it because I do. There's a difference." Frank the businessman had to look away. The woman with the leather folder was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it. And Catherine Mercer stood there and looked at Ethan Cole for a long, long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed entirely. 22 years I've been in banking," she said quietly, "and I have never, not once, watched a man show grace to the person who just humiliated him in front of his own child." She shook her head slowly. "Margaret, you should hear this clearly, because it's the last thing I'll say about it. The man you called a fraud, the man you decided wasn't good enough to bank here, he just stood up for your dignity when you'd stripped him of his. That's who was standing in front of you this morning. That's who you tore that check away from. I hope you carry that out the door with you, because I don't think you'll find a heavier thing to carry." Vamos. Margaret Hale's face crumpled. She didn't argue. She didn't have anything left to argue with. She just nodded once small and turned toward the office to gather her things, and Thomas Brennan walked beside her, not behind her like a guard, but beside her like a man seeing another person, through the worst morning of their life, and the glass door closed behind them. And the lobby, 40 people strong, let out a breath it had been holding for what felt like an hour. 9:46. Ethan looked at the clock again and almost laughed. 44 minutes. His whole life had turned over in 44 minutes. "Mr. Cole?" Catherine Mercer's voice pulled him back. She'd crossed to him again, and her professional composure had returned. But there was a warmth under it now, something real. "I owe you more than an apology, and I intend to pay it. But first, genuinely, how are you, both of you?" She looked down at Sophie. That was a lot for a young lady to see. "I'm okay," Sophie announced. "Daddy said we don't be mean back, and he wasn't mean back even to the mean lady. So I think Daddy won." She frowned, considering. "But I still didn't get pancakes." And that broke the tension so completely that half the lobby laughed, real laughter, the kind that comes out of you after you've been braced hard for a long time, and even Catherine Mercer smiled, a genuine one this time, all the way to her eyes. "You know what?" Catherine said, crouching down to Sophie's level. "I think your daddy definitely won. And I think we owe you the biggest stack of pancakes in the state of Ohio. But before that, I need about 20 more minutes of your daddy's time to fix all of this properly. Can you be patient with me for 20 more minutes?" "Is there more juice?" "There is unlimited juice," Catherine said solemnly. "Okay, deal." And Sophie shook Catherine Mercer's hand like a tiny executive closing an acquisition, and the whole lobby laughed again. Catherine rose and turned to the room. "Everyone, I'm sorry for the disruption to your morning. I know a lot of you came in here to do your banking, and you got a great deal more than you bargained for. Derek." She looked at the young teller who straightened up like he'd been called on in class. "I'm going to need you to help me get every station moving again, because these good people have waited long enough. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am," Derek said, and then quieter. "Ms. Mercer, I want to say I called her over. I'm the one who called Ms. Hale over in the first place. If I hadn't—" "Derek." Catherine's voice was kind but firm. "You called your manager because you didn't know what to do with a large transaction, which is exactly what you're supposed to do. That's not a mistake. That's the system working right up until the point where somebody more senior than you broke it." She held his eyes. "And then when it counted, you stood in front of a full lobby, and you told the truth, even though it was your boss you were contradicting. Do you understand how rare that is? How much backbone that takes at your age?" She almost smiled. "You didn't fail this morning, son. You passed. Now go get those lines moving." Derek's face went red, and then it went proud, and he turned and started calling people forward, and Ethan watched the kid, the same nervous kid who'd looked at his frayed cuff an hour ago and flinched, walk a little taller than he had before, and Ethan thought maybe that's the one that matters. Maybe the kid remembers this his whole career. Maybe there's some future customer in a worn-out jacket who gets treated right because of what Derek watched happen today. Maybe. Mr. Cole. Catherine turned back to him and gestured toward the glass office now empty. Would you and Sophie come sit with me? There's a great deal we need to make right, and I'd rather not do the rest of it standing on the floor. Thomas will bring your daughter that juice. Ethan looked at the office. The same office Margaret had swept out of an hour ago, like weather rolling in. He thought about how when he'd walked through the front doors at 9:02 that morning, all he'd wanted in the entire world was for one person in this building to treat him like he mattered. He hadn't dared to hope for this. For a director saying sir. For a room full of strangers on his side. For his daughter watching him stand tall and hold his temper and come out the other side with his dignity not just intact, but seen. Yeah, Ethan said, and his voice was thick. He picked up the folded pieces of his torn check off the marble counter. He wasn't going to leave them there. Not now. Not ever. And he took his daughter's hand. Yeah, we'll come sit with you. He started toward the office. Then he stopped. Ms. Mercer, he said. That question I asked you before, the 11 people, the ones before me. Catherine met his eyes. I haven't forgotten it, Mr. Cole. I promise you I haven't. She paused and something settled into her expression, something that looked a lot like a decision being made. In fact, I think that question might end up being the most important thing that happened in this building today. More important than the check. More important than her. She nodded toward the door Margaret had gone out of. Come sit down, because what I want to talk to you about isn't just fixing your account. It's a great deal bigger than that. And I have a feeling you might be exactly the man I need to hear it. Ethan Cole stood there for a moment, holding the torn pieces of everything he'd worked for in one hand and his daughter in the other, and he looked at the regional director of Rivergate National Bank, and he didn't quite understand yet what she meant. But something in the way she'd said it, exactly the man I need to hear it, made his heart start to beat a little faster. He tightened his grip on Sophie's hand, and the two of them walked into the office together, and Catherine Mercer closed the glass door behind them. Catherine Mercer sat down across from Ethan, folded her hands on the desk, and for a moment, she didn't say anything at all. Sophie had settled into the chair beside her father with a fresh juice box that Thomas had brought in, and she was working the straw with the total concentration of a child who has decided the grown-ups will handle the grown-up things. Before we talk about anything bigger, Catherine finally said, let me fix what's directly in front of us because you've waited long enough for that. I already confirmed the check from your account phone. I called Meridian Trust myself while the footage was playing. The escrow account is real. The funds are real. $10 million cleared and waiting exactly as you said. She looked at him steadily. You were telling the truth from the second you walked through that door. I want you to hear me say that out loud. You were telling the truth, and this bank called you a liar. I'm sorry. Ethan nodded slowly. He'd known it was real. He'd known it all along. But there was something about hearing it said by someone in authority. Someone who'd actually done the 90-second thing. Margaret wouldn't. That loosened a knot in his chest. He hadn't even realized was still tied. Now. Catherine pulled a legal pad toward her. The torn check. That's not a problem, and I need you to stop worrying about it if you have been. A cashier's check that's been destroyed can be reissued by the originating institution. I've already put in the call to Meridian Trust to have a replacement drawn up. It'll take until tomorrow morning to process on their end. That's their timeline, not mine, or I'd have it here in an hour. But it is coming, and it will be for the full $10 million. And this bank is going to eat every fee, every wire cost, every inconvenience associated with it. You won't pay a cent for our mistake. Tomorrow, Ethan repeated. Tomorrow morning. I know that means one more trip. I'm sorry for that too. She paused. But when you come back tomorrow, I promise you, it will be nothing like today. Daddy, Sophie said around her straw. Does that mean pancakes are tomorrow? Ethan almost laughed. No, baby. Pancakes are still today. Nothing's stopping the pancakes. Okay, good. Catherine smiled, then set her pen down and leaned back, and Ethan felt the air in the little office change. This was the part she'd hinted at on the floor. This was the bigger thing. "Mr. Cole, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know there's no wrong answer, and nothing you say changes a single thing about your account or your money. That's all settled regardless. This is separate." She studied him. "You said something out there that I haven't been able to shake. You asked about the 11 people, the ones Margaret flagged before you who turned out to be honest, who didn't have a Thomas by the door and just went home." "I remember. I've been in this business 22 years, Catherine said. And in 22 years, do you know how many customers have asked me about someone other than themselves in the middle of their own crisis? Standing there with their own $10 million torn up on the floor?" She held up a hand, thumb, and finger together, making a 0. "None. Not one. Everyone who's ever been wronged in one of my branches has wanted to talk about their wrong. Their money, their apology, their compensation. Which is fair. It's human. It's what I do." She leaned forward. "You're the first person who ever stood in that lobby bleeding and asked me who else was hurting." Ethan shifted, uncomfortable with the praise. I know what it's like to get turned away. I've been turned away my whole life, Ms. Mercer, not from banks necessarily, from jobs, from rooms, from people who took one look and decided. So when you said there were 11 before me, I couldn't just—" He shook his head. "I couldn't just take my apology and go get pancakes and pretend they didn't exist. That's all. It's not noble. It's just that I've been one of them." "That's exactly what makes it noble," Catherine said quietly. "That you don't think it is." She was silent for a moment. Then she made her decision, and Ethan saw her make it the same way he'd watched Margaret make her terrible decisions 2 hours ago, except this one moved the opposite direction. "I'm going to tell you something I probably shouldn't tell a customer," Catherine said. "This bank has a problem, Mr. Cole. It's not just Margaret. Margaret is one branch manager who finally did something so egregious and so public that I couldn't look away. But the pattern she showed today, deciding who's trustworthy based on how they look, refusing to do the verification that would settle it, treating discretion as a license to profile, that's not one woman. It's baked into how a lot of people in this industry are trained to think about risk. And I've known it for years. I've known, and I've filed it under systemic and complicated and not something one director can fix. And I've let it ride." Her voice tightened. "And every time I let it ride, there was an 11. Somewhere. A person who walked out humiliated because I decided it was too big a problem to touch." "So touch it," Ethan said. Catherine looked at him. "You keep talking about it like it's this enormous thing," Ethan said. "The industry, the training, the system. And maybe it is. But this morning it came down to one small thing, didn't it? One phone call. 90 seconds. Every one of those 11 people, the whole giant systemic problem you're describing, every bit of it, would have evaporated if somebody had just been required to pick up the phone before they were allowed to call a man a fraud." He spread his hands. "You don't have to fix the whole industry, Ms. Mercer. You just have to make the phone call mandatory." Catherine Mercer stared at him. "But and then she started writing on her legal pad fast, and she said almost to herself, "Mandatory verification before adverse action. No employee below the regional level can refuse delay or reverse a transaction on suspicion of fraud without documented completion of issuer verification first. No exceptions. No instinct. No discretion. You verify or you escalate to someone who will, and you keep your hands off the customer's property until you do." She looked up. "You just wrote bank policy, Mr. Cole. In one sentence, standing here with juice box stains on your sleeve." She shook her head in something like wonder. "I've had compliance committees take 6 months to say less." "It's the juice box's sleeve, actually," Sophie corrected. "I spilled a little." "My apologies," Catherine said gravely. "In one sentence, with juice box stains on your daughter's sleeve." 10:02 in the morning, an hour exactly since he'd walked in. Ethan sat there and let himself feel for the first time that maybe the worst morning of his year was quietly turning into something else entirely. "But I want to do more than write a memo," Catherine went on. And now there was real momentum in her voice, the sound of a person who's been sitting on something for years, finally getting to stand up. "A memo gets filed. A memo gets forgotten. I want something with a name on it. Something people remember why it exists." She set her pen down. "And this is the part where I make you an offer you're completely free to refuse." "I'm listening. I want to build a review program, real one funded regional to start, and I'll fight to take it national. Every adverse action fraud flag gets a second set of eyes before the customer is ever turned away. Every customer who was wrongly flagged, including, if I can find them, those 11 gets contacted, gets an apology, gets made whole. And the whole thing gets a name that reminds every employee who reads it exactly what happens when you decide you already know the answer." She looked at him. "I'd like to call it the Cole Standard. After you. And I'd like you, if you're willing and only if you're willing, to sit on the advisory board that shapes it. Paid position, real influence, your name, your story, your voice in the room when we decide how this bank treats the next man who walks in wearing the wrong jacket." The little office went very quiet. Ethan Cole sat there, and for a long moment he genuinely couldn't speak. Because 2 hours ago, he'd been a man nobody would look up for. A man in a frayed jacket asking 4 times for someone to just make a phone call. And now, the regional director of the bank that had humiliated him was asking to put his name on the thing that would stop it from happening to anyone else. "Ms. Mercer," he said carefully, "I build cybersecurity systems. I don't know the first thing about banking policy. You knew enough to fix it in 1 sentence. That was luck. That was lived experience," Catherine said. "Which is the one thing every person on my current committees is missing, and the exact reason we've never fixed this. I have a table full of people who've never once been the man in the worn jacket. That's the whole problem, Mr. Cole. I don't need another banker. I've got a building full of bankers. I need someone who knows what it feels like from the other side of the counter. And you just showed me out there on that floor that you not only know what it feels like, you know how to respond to it without becoming cruel yourself. Do you understand how rare that combination is?" Ethan looked down at Sophie. She'd finished her juice and was watching him now, and he thought about what it would mean for her future, for the story she'd carry about her father to say yes to this. Not the money. The money was already handled, already real, already going to change their lives. This was something else. This was a chance to take the worst thing that had happened to him and turn it into a wall that stood between the next Ethan Cole and the next Margaret Hale. "Can I ask you something first?" he said. "Anything. The 11. You keep saying you'll try to find them. I don't want to try." He held her eyes, and there was steel in it, the same quiet steel that had stopped Margaret cold 2 hours before. "If I put my name on this, the first thing that name does before the board, before the policy, before any of it, is find those 11 people and make it right. All of them. However long it takes, however much it costs. That's not a feature of the program, Ms. Mercer. That's the condition. You want the Cole Standard. The Cole Standard starts with the people this bank already hurt, not the ones it might hurt tomorrow, the ones it already did." Catherine Mercer looked at him across the desk, and something moved through her face. Not surprise exactly, but the specific expression of a person watching someone become in real time exactly who they'd hoped he'd be. "That's the condition," she repeated softly. "That's the condition. Then that's the program." She extended her hand across the desk. "You have my word, Mr. Cole. In writing if you want it, and I'd expect you to want it. The 11 come first. We find every one of them, we apologize, we make them whole. And then we build the rest." She kept her hand out. "Do we have a deal?" Ethan looked at her hand. He thought about the man who'd walked in at 9:02 so braced for humiliation that he'd almost turned around at the door. He thought about all the years of being decided about, of being the man nobody looked up for. And then He took Catherine Mercer's hand and shook it. "We have a deal," he said. "And Ms. Mercer, thank you. Not for the offer, for the phone call. You have no idea what it does to a man after a morning like this to watch somebody in charge just—" His voice caught. "Just do the right thing. Even when it's hard, even when it means firing someone. Even when it'd be easier to smooth it over and send me on my way with a gift card and an apology." He swallowed. "I'll believe in a lot of things again after today that I'd stopped believing in. That's worth more than the 10 million. I mean that." "Daddy's crying a little," Sophie observed, not unkindly. "Daddy's got something in his eye," Ethan said. "That's what you always say when you're crying," Sophie said, and patted his arm with the wisdom of an 8-year-old who has seen through this exact defense many times. "It's okay. Ms. Catherine, my daddy cries at the good parts of movies too." Catherine Mercer laughed, really laughed, and wiped at the corner of her own eye. "You know what, Sophie, I think crying at the good parts means your daddy's got his heart in the right place. Not everybody does." 10:14. There was a soft knock at the glass door, and Thomas Brennan leaned in, and the big man's face, which had been so grim all morning, had gone almost gentle. "Ms. Mercer." "She's gone. I walked her to her car, made sure she was okay to drive. She was pretty broke up." He hesitated. She asked me to tell Mr. Cole something." Ethan looked up. "What did she say?" Thomas came in, closed the door behind him, and stood there a moment like a man carrying something he wasn't sure he should set down. "She said," he cleared his throat, "she said, to tell you she's been doing this job for 28 years, and in all that time, nobody ever stood up for her. Nobody. And that a man she'd just torn to pieces did it in the space of 5 minutes. And she said she doesn't understand it, and she's not sure she deserves it, but she wanted you to know that she's going to spend a long time thinking about the kind of person who'd do that." Thomas paused. "And then she said she was sorry. Not the kind of sorry you say to save your job. She was already fired, she had nothing left to save. Just sorry. She said, tell the little girl she's sorry about the pancakes money." The office was quiet. Ethan sat there and absorbed it. He didn't feel triumph. He'd expected some small, ugly part of him to feel triumph at hearing Margaret Hale broken and apologizing. Instead, he just felt tired and sad, and something else underneath it, something that felt a little like being understood. "Tell her." Ethan started, then stopped, thought about it. "You know what, she's gone, and maybe some things are better left where they are. But if you talk to her again, Thomas, tell her I hope she lands somewhere. Tell her the kind of instinct that made this morning happen, she can unlearn it. It's not too late. People aren't the worst thing they ever did. I have to believe that, because I've done things I'm not proud of too. And if I'm gonna forgive myself for mine, I don't get to hold hers over her forever." He looked down at Sophie. "And tell her Sophie forgives her about the pancakes." "I do," Sophie said. "Do you?" Sophie considered it with enormous seriousness. "If she's really sorry, then yes. But she has to be really sorry. Not fake sorry." "She was real sorry, sweetheart," Thomas said softly. "I've seen a lot of fake sorry in 30 years of police work. That wasn't it." "Okay then," Sophie decided. "I forgive her, but she still shouldn't rip people's checks." "No," Thomas agreed, and the corner of his mouth turned up. "She surely shouldn't." Catherine Mercer had been watching all of this in silence, and when she spoke again, her voice had gone quiet and certain. "Thomas, before you go back out there, I need to talk to you too, and it's good, so don't look so worried." She almost smiled. "You made a phone call this morning that most people in your position wouldn't have made. You went over your manager's head, you risked your job, you stood in the middle of a lobby, and you refused an order because you knew the order was wrong. Do you have any idea how many people fail that exact test? Every single day in every kind of workplace. People who see the wrong thing happening and tell themselves it's not their place, not their pay grade, not their problem." Thomas shifted uncomfortable. "I just did what anybody—" "No," Catherine said. Not anybody. You. And I'm not going to let it pass with a thank you and a pat on the back. She picked her pen back up. There's a security operations coordinator position open at the regional level. Better pay, better hours. A role where your instincts, the real kind, the kind that reads people right instead of wrong, actually get to matter across a dozen branches instead of one lobby. I want you to interview for it. Today's the reason. What you did this morning is the whole resume. Thomas Brennan, 30-year sheriff's deputy, retired with commendation. The man who'd stayed calm through every second of the worst morning that bank had ever seen, Thomas Brennan stood there in the little glass office and for the first time all day looked completely thrown. Ma'am, He stopped. Started again. My wife passed a year ago. I took this job just to have somewhere to be, somewhere to put the hours. His voice roughened. I didn't expect anywhere to actually need me. Not anymore. Well, Catherine said gently, this bank needs you. And I suspect it's needed people like you a lot longer than it's admitted. She stood and extended her hand to him too. So, will you interview? Thomas looked at her hand. Then he looked at Ethan, and Ethan gave him a small nod. Go on. And Thomas Brennan reached out and shook the regional director's hand, and something in the old man's weathered face came loose that had been locked up tight for a long, long time. Yes, ma'am, he said. I'll interview. Good. Catherine looked around the little office at the security guard, finding a reason to keep going at the young father who'd rewritten her bank's conscience in one sentence, at the little girl with juice on her sleeve, who'd decided to forgive the woman who'd wronged her father. And Ethan watched something settle over the regional director's face that looked a lot like the feeling he'd been chasing for 2 years without a name for it. It looked like a person who'd finally done something that mattered. All right, Catherine said, and her voice was full again, warm and moving forward. Here's what happens now. Mr. Cole, I'm going to walk you and Sophie out of this branch myself, past every person in that lobby, and I'm going to do it slow. Because they watched this bank treat you like a criminal an hour ago, and they deserve to watch it treat you like the man you actually are. She came around the desk. Then you're going to go get the biggest stack of pancakes Ohio has ever seen. And tomorrow morning when you come back for your replacement check, you're not going to wait in any line, and no one is going to look at your jacket, and the first thing that happens is going to be so different from this morning that I hope it washes some of the taste out of your mouth. Ethan stood. He picked up the folded pieces of his torn check off the desk one more time. He still hadn't let them go, and maybe he never would. Maybe he'd frame them, and he took his daughter's hand. Ready, baby? Ready? Sophie hopped down from the chair. Then she tugged his sleeve. Daddy, is the mean lady still the boss? No, sweetheart. She's not the boss anymore. Who's the boss now? Ethan looked at Catherine Mercer standing there by the door of the little glass office, waiting to walk them out with her head held high. Somebody who makes the phone call, Ethan said. That's who's the boss now. And Catherine Mercer opened the door, and the three of them stepped back out into the lobby, where 40 people who had not left, who had waited the whole time to see how it ended, slowly began to rise from their seats. It started with Frank, the businessman who'd told Margaret to just call the number, who'd counted the 4 refusals out loud, who'd said the whole room was on Ethan's side. He rose from his chair first, and he brought his hands together slow at first, and then the woman with the leather folder stood and joined him. And then the young mortgage couple, and then a man Ethan had never spoken to, and then all of them 40 strong, the whole lobby of Rivergate National Bank on its feet, applauding a man in a worn brown jacket and cracked boots as he walked across the marble floor holding his daughter's hand. Ethan Cole stopped in the middle of the lobby. He hadn't expected this. He'd braced himself for so many things that morning: humiliation, a fight, a long argument, being escorted out, but not this. Not a room full of strangers standing up to tell him, without words, that they'd seen him, that they knew who the honest man was, that the story they'd carry home to their families over dinner tonight was his story, and in it he was not the fraud. He didn't know what to do with his face, so he just stood there, and he held Sophie's hand a little tighter, and he nodded once to Frank, Then around the room, a small, tight, grateful nod, and Sophie, God bless her, waved at everybody like she was in a parade. "Daddy, they're clapping for us," she whispered, delighted. "They are baby." "Why?" Ethan crouched down right there in the middle of the applauding lobby, and he looked his daughter in the eye. "Because this morning some people forgot how to treat other people right. And you and me, we stood up straight, and we told the truth, and we didn't be mean back. And these folks watched us do it. And they're clapping because they want to remember that it's possible, that's all. They're not clapping for the money, Sophie. They never even saw the money. They're clapping for how we did it." Sophie considered this with her whole small, serious heart. So being nice when it's hard is the thing they're clapping for. That's exactly the thing. That's a good thing to clap for, Sophie decided, and she waved again, and the lobby laughed and clapped harder, and Frank actually put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled. Catherine Mercer walked them to the door. She'd said she'd do it slow, and she did. She walked beside Ethan with her head high, and she made sure every person in that lobby got to see the regional director of the bank, treating this man like he was the most important customer in the building, because he was. At the door she stopped and turned to him and put out her hand one more time. "Tomorrow morning," she said. 9 o'clock. Ask for me at the front and no one else. Your check will be here. Your account will be open in your name before you even sit down, and I'll have the paperwork for the advisory board ready, if you're still willing to look at it." She paused. "And Mr. Cole, one more thing. What you did in there for Margaret. I've been running branches for a long time. I'm going to remember that a lot longer than I remember what she did. You should know that." "Thank you, Ms. Mercer." "Catherine," she said, "if we're going to build a thing with your name on it, I think we're past Ms. Mercer." Ethan almost smiled. "Catherine." "Go get your pancakes, Ethan." She crouched down to Sophie. "And you, young lady, you were the bravest person in this whole building today. Braver than your daddy even, and that's saying something. Don't let anybody tell you different." "I know," Sophie said cheerfully, and Catherine Mercer laughed all the way from her chest, and the bell over the door chimed as Ethan Cole walked his daughter out into the morning, a completely different man than the one who'd walked in. They got the pancakes. The biggest stack in Ohio, just like Catherine promised, at a little diner 3 blocks from the bank, and Ethan ordered whipped cream on Sophie's, and then, when the waitress asked, ordered it on his own too, because for once in 2 years there was no reason not to. And Sophie built a whipped cream mountain, and knocked it over with her fork, and laughed, and Ethan sat across from his daughter in a vinyl booth and watched her laugh and felt something in his chest. He hadn't felt in so long he'd half forgotten its name. It was peace, not because of the money. He kept coming back to that, turning it over. The money was going to change everything. The too small coat, the cracked boots, the ramen nights, the not right now baby, all of it gone. But that wasn't the peace. The peace was that his daughter had watched the whole world try to tell her father he was worthless, and she'd watched her father stand up straight and refuse to believe it. And she'd watched the world come around in the end. That was the thing she'd carry. Not my daddy got rich, but my daddy was right, and he was kind about it even when it was hard. And you couldn't put a price on giving a child that. He barely slept that night. Not from worry, from the opposite. From a kind of quiet, buzzing hope he wasn't used to and didn't quite trust lying there in the dark of the small apartment. He wouldn't have to keep much longer. Listening to Sophie breathe in the next room, thinking about the 11 people. Turning them over in his mind. Wondering who they were. Wondering if any of them had a daughter. Wondering how many of them had gone home and looked in the mirror and believed just a little the thing the bank had told them about themselves. He was going to find them. That was the condition, and Catherine had given her word, and tomorrow it started. 9 o'clock the next morning, Ethan Cole walked back through the doors of Rivergate National Bank. And it was exactly as Catherine had promised, nothing like the day before. Derek saw him first, and the young teller's whole face lit up, and he came around the counter, around it, not behind it, and stuck out his hand. "Mr. Cole." "Good morning, sir. Miss Mercer's expecting you." Can I get Sophie a juice? We've got the apple and the fruit punch. Fruit punch, Sophie said before Ethan could answer. Fruit punch it is. Derek grinned, and Ethan shook the kid's hand and thought, there he is. There's the one who'll remember. There's the one who treats the next worn jacket right. Catherine came out of the office, Margaret's old office, though Ethan noticed the nameplate was already gone from the door, and she wasn't alone. Thomas Brennan was with her, and Thomas was not in a security uniform. He was in a shirt and tie, a little stiff in it, tugging at the collar like a man unused to dressing up, and he was grinning like Ethan had never seen him grin. He got the job, Catherine said before Ethan could even ask. Interviewed yesterday afternoon. Security Operations Coordinator Regional. Starts Monday. First order of business is helping me design the verification protocols for the coal standard, since he's the man who proved why we need them. Thomas. Ethan crossed the lobby and shook the big man's hand hard. Congratulations. You earned that a long time ago. I don't know about that, Thomas said gruffly. But I'll tell you what, Mr. Cole. I took that security job to run out the clock. I figured the useful part of my life was behind me. Wife gone, kids grown, nothing left to do but watch a door. His voice thickened. And then you walked through it. And I remembered. He had to stop, clear his throat. I remembered there's still work worth doing. There's still people worth standing up for. You gave an old man his purpose back, and I don't expect I'll ever be able to thank you right for it. So I'll just say it plain. Thank you. Ethan gripped his hand tighter, and for a second neither man said anything, because sometimes there's nothing to say. You picked up the phone, Ethan finally managed. Everybody in that lobby had a phone within reach, and only one man used his. That's the whole story, Thomas. That's the whole thing. You picked up the phone. They went into the office, and there on the desk in a crisp envelope with the Meridian Trust letterhead was the replacement check. $10 million. Ethan picked it up and looked at it, and it was strange, this piece of paper that had cost him 2 years and one terrible morning. This thing Margaret Hale had torn to pieces in front of his child, and now here it was again, whole reissued, waiting. He'd thought he'd feel something enormous holding it. Instead, he mostly felt the folded scraps of the old one in his jacket pocket. He'd kept them. He was going to keep them for good. Before we deposit it, Catherine said, sitting down across from him. I want to show you something, because you gave me a condition yesterday, and I gave you my word, and I don't want you to have to wonder whether I meant it. She slid a folder across the desk. I stayed late last night, pulled the records. Margaret's 14 fraud flags over 3 years cross-referenced against final resolution. The 11 who were wrongly turned away. Ethan opened the folder. 11 names. 11 real people with account histories and dates, and in the margins in Catherine's own handwriting, small notes. Elderly. Widowed. Denied access to her own funds for 6 days. Immigrant. Refused a cashier's check deposit. Never came back. Disabled veteran. Flagged twice. Ethan read them slowly, one at a time. And by the time he got to the bottom of the page, his jaw was tight and his eyes were wet. These are people, he said quietly. They're people, Catherine agreed. And starting Monday, Thomas and I are going to find every single one of them. We're going to call them ourselves, not a form letter, not a call center, us. We're going to apologize. We're going to reimburse every fee, every overdraft, every consequence that flag caused them. And we're going to tell them out loud that they were never the problem, that the problem was ours. She held his eyes. That was your condition, Ethan. The 11 come first. I'm telling you, it's already begun. Shage. Ethan closed the folder. He sat there a moment. Then he said, I want to be on those calls. Not all of them, but some. I want to be there when you tell the veteran and the widow. He tapped the folder. Because they don't need to hear it from a bank. They've heard from the bank. They need to hear it from somebody who was standing where they stood. Somebody who knows exactly what it did to them, because it did the same thing to me. Catherine Mercer looked at him for a long moment. That, she said softly, is why your name goes on this, right there. That's the whole reason. She pulled out another folder, the advisory board paperwork, and set it beside the check. You don't have to sign today. Take it home. Have a lawyer look at it. But I'll tell you what I told the board when I called them last night to tell them what happened in this lobby. She leaned forward. I told them the most valuable person I've ever recruited, never applied, never interviewed, and never wanted the job. He just walked in one morning wearing the wrong jacket, got treated like garbage, and responded by asking about 11 strangers. And I told them, if we don't put that man in the room where the decisions get made, then we haven't learned a single thing from what we did to him. Ethan looked down at the paperwork, then at Sophie, who was drinking her fruit punch and swinging her legs and watching him with those wide, serious eyes. Daddy, she said, are you going to help the bank not be mean to people? I think I might, baby. Even the mean lady's old bank. Especially this bank, Ethan said, because this is the one that already knows what happens when you get it wrong. This is the one that's ready to do better, and somebody's got to be in the room to make sure it does. He picked up the pen. You want to watch your daddy sign something important? Yes. Then he signed it. Right there with his daughter watching with juice on both their sleeves. Ethan Cole signed his name to the advisory board of the Cole Standard, and Catherine Mercer signed beneath him, and Thomas Brennan stood witness in his stiff new tie, and it was done. Then, and only then, did they deposit the check. Derek processed it himself. He'd asked to. He ran it through with careful, proud hands, verified it in 90 seconds, the way it should have been verified the day before, and when the confirmation printed, he tore the receipt off and handed it across the counter with both hands, like it was something precious. There you go, Mr. Cole, Derek said. $10 million, deposited, cleared, and safe. Your account's active. And... The young man hesitated, then plowed ahead. And I just want to say I'm real sorry about yesterday. I keep thinking if I'd just verified it myself when you first handed it to me, none of it would have happened. I called her over and Derek. Ethan stopped him the same way Catherine had. Look at me, son. You did the right thing yesterday when it counted. You stood in a lobby full of people, and you told the truth against your own boss. You know how many grown men twice your age couldn't have done that? He put out his hand. Don't carry yesterday like it's yours to carry. It isn't. You be the guy who verifies the check, that's all. Be that guy for the next 40 years, and you'll have done more good than you can imagine. Derek shook his hand, and his eyes were wet too, and Ethan thought the whole bank might just run out of dry eyes before the morning was over. They walked out together. All of them, Ethan and Sophie, Catherine and Thomas and Derek, trailing behind, out through the lobby of Rivergate National Bank, and at the door, Ethan stopped and turned around and looked at the place one more time. Yesterday, he'd stood right here on this exact patch of marble and watched a woman tear his life into pieces and scatter it at his feet. Yesterday, he'd been a fraud, a con man, a you people a man to be escorted out. Today, the whole staff was walking him to the door like family. Nothing about him had changed. Same jacket, same boots, same tired face, same frayed cuff he still hadn't fixed. The only thing that had changed was whether the people in this building were willing to look past it and see the man. And that Ethan understood now had never been his job to prove. It had always been theirs to see. Catherine, he said, can I ask you for one last thing, and then I'll get out of your hair, I promise. Anything. The old check, the one she tore up. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded scraps, 6 pieces edges soft now from being handled. I want to keep these, but I want to do something with them first. He looked at her. When you build the Cole Standard, when you train the new people, when you tell them why it exists, I want you to show them this. The torn one, not framed all nice. Torn. I want the last thing every new employee sees before they start their first day to be a picture of what $10 million looks like when somebody decides they already know the answer. I want them to see the tape marks. I want them to know a real man's real daughter watched it happen. His voice went quiet and hard. You want to stop the next Margaret, don't hand them a policy. Hand them these pieces. Make them look. Catherine Mercer took the torn scraps from his hand like they were made of glass. "I'll do better than show them a picture," she said. "I'm going to frame the real ones. With your permission. Right by the entrance of every training center we run. The torn check and one line under it." She looked at him. "What should the line say, Ethan?" "You've earned the right to write it." Ethan Cole thought about it. He thought about 2 years in the dark and one terrible morning and the 11 people he was going to help find. He thought about Derek and Thomas and a director who made the phone call. He thought about his daughter watching all of it, learning from all of it, and he thought about what he wanted her to know for the rest of her life. And then he knew exactly what the line should say. "Make the call," Ethan said. "That's it. 3 words. Under the torn check. Make the call. Because that's the whole thing, Catherine. That's the entire difference between the worst day of a man's life and a stack of pancakes with his kid. Somebody just has to be willing to pick up the phone and find out the truth before they decide they already know it." He picked up Sophie, hoisting her onto his hip, even though she was really getting too big for it, and she wrapped her arm around his neck. Everybody in that lobby yesterday had a phone. Only one man used his. Build a whole bank full of people who'll pick up the phone, and you'll never need my name on anything again. "I'm keeping your name on it anyway," Catherine said, and her voice cracked just slightly. "The world needs to know the man it's named after, not just the rule." Ethan Cole carried his daughter out the door of Rivergate National Bank, and the bell chimed above them one last time, and the morning was bright and clean, and full of everything that was finally, after 2 long years, about to be possible. Sophie rested her head on his shoulder as they walked to the truck. "Daddy." "Yeah, baby. Yesterday the mean lady said you were fake, but today everybody said you were a good man." She lifted her head and looked at him, working it out the way she worked everything out all the way down to the bottom. "So which one is real?" Ethan stopped walking. He set his daughter down gently on the sidewalk, and he crouched to her level one more time, and he took both her small hands in his big worn ones, and he looked his little girl in the eye and gave her the truest thing he knew. "Sophie, listen to me. What other people say about you, good or bad, the mean lady or the whole clapping room, none of it makes you real or fake. It never did. You know who's real. The person you are when nobody's clapping and nobody's watching. And it's the hardest thing in the world to do the right thing, and you do it anyway. That's real. That's the only real there is." He squeezed her hands. "I knew who I was yesterday when that whole bank called me a liar. And I'll know who I am tomorrow, no matter what anybody says. Because I'm your daddy, and I stood up straight, and I told the truth, and I wasn't mean back. And you..." His voice broke clean in half. "You're going to grow up knowing you can do the exact same thing, no matter what jacket you're wearing, no matter who's decided about you. You stand up straight, you tell the truth, and you never ever let anybody make you cruel." Sophie looked at her father for a long moment. Then she threw her arms around his neck and hugged him with everything her 8-year-old body had, and into his ear she whispered, "You're the realest one, Daddy. You're the realest one in the whole bank." And Ethan Cole, the man they'd called a fraud, the man in the worn brown jacket and the cracked boots, the man nobody would look up for, held his daughter tight on a bright, ordinary sidewalk and understood all the way down to the bottom of him that she was right. The $10 million was already in the bank. It would buy the coat, the boots, the house, the future, all of it. But it was not the victory. It was never the victory. The victory was standing on a sidewalk with his daughter's arms around his neck, knowing that when the whole world had tried to tell him who he was, he had looked it dead in the eye and told it the truth instead. And his little girl had seen him do it and would carry it forever. Yes. Respect isn't given by the people in the nice coats. It isn't torn away by them either. Real respect is the thing you keep when they try to take it, and the thing you refuse to stop giving others, even the ones who never gave it to you. Ethan Cole walked in worth $10 million and one honest man's dignity. He walked out with both, and no one ever again was going to convince his daughter that the size of a man's heart could be measured by the state of his boots. That was the whole story. That was the only victory that ever mattered.